We do have the one, the only, at D Broze Live Free coming at us. Oh, it looks like you shared it there on your Twitter there, getting a nice little boost from your Twitter. How are you there, Mr. Derrick?
I'm doing good, brother. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's always a pleasure, man.
Cool.
And I'm always inspired by your work. And you've really been getting out there on some pretty big shows, putting the message out. So kudos to you. I'm happy to see that.
Thanks, brother. I've been trying to put in the work to get out there and get to bigger audiences and try to spread our freedom-based common sense message. Because as I'm sure you're seeing, there's a lot of insanity going on right now. Yeah,
it's a classic move. And it's Jordan Page performed at the Land Summit 5. And if folks aren't familiar with him, he's an old school Ron Paul Liberty rocker. He used to do a bunch of big conferences and Ron Paul events. But he's got this old song, "And the pendulum swings from the left to the right." And it's like the same thing. He wrote about it, and he was talking about Bush and Kerry and, Obama. And it's the same thing with Trump, right? It swings hard left. And then that causes a reaction, and everyone's like, well, at least it's not Harris, and at least it's not all this weird leftists and gender identity and all this crazy economic stuff. Boom. And then everyone's so polarized that they're kind of brainwashed into accepting some pretty extreme measures. So I do want to get into like adversity and spirituality. And I know that you've had some struggles in your life that you've managed to transmute. But first, let's start with the message that you're sharing and what you're seeing. Of course, with all these immigration riots, but even beyond that, just all this deception that's taking place in the modern conservative movements. What's the message that you've been priming here on all these programs you've been going on?
a lot of the conversations have been mainly focused on Palantir because Palantir is getting a lot of attention, rightfully so, in the last couple of weeks. And then, Trump and Elon start going at each other. So some people are like, oh, is this a distraction? I'm really trying to stay focused on that. But obviously, in the last couple of days over the weekend, there's protests turning into violent riots in some cases in Los Angeles. And I was actually just tweeting a little bit ago saying that I think there's a lot of people, some conservatives, not all, of course, some conservatives who are just so sucked into the Twitter, MAGA, Rumble sphere and they're in these echo chambers. Obviously, this happens left and right, but they're in these echo chambers that are just telling them that there's a mass invasion going on. George Soros is doing everything. Next week, there's going to be riots and civil war across the country, and just pumping people full of fear. And as you said, John, obviously that fear is a great tool for helping that pendulum swing back and forth like you were just describing. The other thing that I'm seeing that is honestly probably one of the more disturbing things that I'm seeing, and I'm sure, unfortunately, some of it's organic. Then there's, I'm sure, some kind of bots going on. We can never discount that. But videos of Marines or soldiers saying, we're coming to free LA, and then people cheering them saying, great, go get those protesters, round them up, arrest them, or even maybe shoot them in some cases. I've seen some comments. Again, I'm sure there's some bots out there, but absolutely there seem to be some Americans who don't know what posse comitatus is, couldn't care less, or as we've seen over the years, they care when it's useful to them. And then when they think it's going to go against their enemies, they're willing to abandon their principles. And it's not surprising. It's not anything new. But in terms of just watching Americans cheer on the idea that, yes, the military is coming to, make the streets safe again, I do think it's all part of a larger psychological operation, as I've been saying for years, that the fight against immigration, the using it to divide people against each other, the fear of the other, all of that was going to play towards Trump being able to come in and militarize the border, increase facial recognition, work with companies like Palantir, and then, of course, starting to round people up. And to be certain, even as an anarchist, like, sure, there are some people who came to the United States illegally and they committed violent crimes, and, hold them accountable, put them in prison, charge them for the crimes they committed. But there's also people who are just living in the United States, maybe been living here for decades, or, plenty long here, and who have jobs and are paying taxes and being good upstanding citizens that aren't bothering anybody. And people still don't care. They're saying, who cares? They came here illegally. Get them out of here. Whether you send them to El Salvador or whatever, we need to get every single illegal out. So there's a lot of complexities. I don't think it's as black and white as we can really dive into with our hot takes on Twitter and social media. So I've been trying to pierce through some of that. And also at the same time, I was listening to what you were saying a moment ago, trying to also hold on to my own inner peace right now and just recognize, like, there's only so much we can do. It's not going to be benefit to my health to spend 10 hours on Twitter or elsewhere arguing with people and thinking I'm going to crack through, and they think they're going to crack through to me, and just calling each other names. It just, I'm guilty of it like anybody else, but I'm trying to do better these days. And just these last few months of really pulling back from that, especially because I saw a really great tweet from Carrie Wedler that was talking about this, that, reminding ourselves that the propaganda, if it just gets you in a state of imbalance, or you're all stressed out, or you're not eating well, or you're not taking care of your mental health and spiritual health, then, what good is it really doing? Okay, maybe you argued online and one or two people might have been convinced. I still believe in the battle of ideas. As I think that's one area where we might diverge, and, you're kind of exclusively focused on the exit and build idea. Obviously, I care about that, and that's a big part of my work too, but I do still have this piece of me that is trying to reach anybody who can be reached. And, sometimes I think that does involve going into the battlefield of ideas and trying to combat these bad ideas, but there's a balance there too. And sometimes it just turns into just, I'm just like, wow, this person's talking to me like I'm an idiot, and I'm talking back to them that way. This isn't going anywhere. How did I find myself in this position? Let me go spend time with my loved ones. I'm here visiting family. Let me go do that. That's more valuable, right? Things like that. So yeah, it's a wild west out there right now. And we really got to hold tight to our critical thinking, hold tight to like our spirit, our spiritual connection to the creator, whatever that may be, because I think that's really what matters right now.
Yeah, and that's what they're trying to pull us away from, and also pulling us away from seeing the humanity and seeing God in one another. This whole idea of they're the other, the immigrant, the leftists, the rioters, but the protesters, when in all reality, the majority of the folks are just good people that are protesting, probably have family that is in the country illegally and has been there for a while or whatever. They don't want to see them tossed out, so they're showing up. One thing that came up for me, though, is because, we've had some pushback on and gone back and forth on the strategy, and you got the journalist cap and you're putting that message out there. And I've been like, there's already enough of us that are awake. We just got to really do the exit and build. And you're like a superhuman, so you're doing both, and they're not like taking away from each other. But it just occurred to me, like, we also, the point of the education and the messaging and the journalism is to make sure that we keep the ranks of libertarians and freedom-minded people and even agorists and our exit and build movement. Like, hold on, guys, just take a deep breath. Don't get caught in the psyop, because on the edges, in the middle, the bulk of us, we're like tried and true, Freedom Cell Network. We got our goals. We get together. We pay attention every once in a while, but we know it's all bullshit, and it doesn't really matter because we have very little control over all these big things, but we do have control over what we're doing here. But then folks that just come in, or they just woke up with COVID or whatever, if we don't make sure that we keep educating them, we could lose them, and then they'll go down the far side. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I think that's a big key thing. And I know we've talked about that too, is COVID comes along and a lot of people wake up. They're, if they weren't already awake, like there's two things. You got some people who are awake, but they weren't ready. Like, yeah, solutions maybe one day. Right now, I'm just having fun watching podcasts and watching the world burn. Then COVID happens and people are like, oh my God, it's actually here. I need to do something. And then other people, COVID was the incident that woke them up and kind of pushed them. And I mean, even just as recent as a week ago when I was on the road, I heard from another person who said, I found the Freedom Cell Network during COVID 1984. We were locked down. We had underground illegal meetings. We found each other through the website. Then we got land, and just these success stories. And I do think there's this component of what you're saying, John, that with every new election and with different distractions that pop up, there's always the chance that we sort of lose a certain amount of people. I saw this during COVID. You saw it too. Freedom Cell Networks popping, websites growing massively. People are, they're moving to Texas, moving to Mexico, buying land, whatever they're doing, they're organizing. And then as things kind of started to slow down and maybe quote unquote go back to normal, people are like, oh, okay, well, there's no reason for me to be doing that stuff anymore because life is pretty normal again. I don't need to worry about that. It's like we only act, or more specifically react, whenever we feel pressured or we feel threatened. And maybe that's just a human thing, but hopefully we can, continue to inspire people to be more proactive. But that happened. People start to go back to their normal lives. And then, of course, the elections come up and everybody's like, wait, hold on. Politics is going to save us again. Even though the last few years I knew it wasn't going to save us, but hey, here's another election. And so there's these cycles, and the statism and the propaganda from that predator class apparatus, like you said, they definitely have been using the fear of the other. So people who were even like super, freedom minded, sovereign minded. When the 2024 election came around, a lot of people were like, well, look, I hear you and I like exit and build, but that's not going to stop the invasion by the immigrants, Derrick, or that's not going to stop Kamala Harris turning the country into full on communism. We have to do it. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And it's just, so I think these things we're going to be sort of doomed in a way to watch this happen throughout the rest of our lives. I've become convinced that there's just people that we're going to watch, people that right now are principled, but in 4 years, they won't be principled, or in a couple of years, or when some big incident happens, like right now, people are like, okay, I hear you, Derrick, but they're burning cities down in LA. And like you said, John, it's not the whole city. Like the right-wing media wants people to think like literally LA, the whole city is just consumed by fire and there's, terrorists everywhere. It's like these very isolated incidents. I actually posted a video yesterday across my social media from back in 2016 when I was in Standing Rock, and I actually filmed the provocateurs. I had to go, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was on the bridge and I was watching these clearly provocateurs show up. They all came together. They were all blocked up. And they basically made it clear, like it went from being natives leading the charge on the bridge, opposing the cops, prayer, sage, really peaceful, kind of mindful, to this whole different crew showing up and them saying, the time for prayer is over. We tried that. Now it's by any means necessary. If you don't like it, get the F off the bridge, get the heck out of here, and just totally changing the vibe. And then by nightfall, they're starting fires or like bumping some rap. I don't know what song it was, but it was definitely it was something that was not good. I'll just say that. And I'm a fan of hip hop, but this was like some bad vibes, like something was going on. But as soon as, and I'm sitting there filming everything, I got surrounded actually by this group of people and said, delete your footage right now. Why the heck are you filming this and that? And they literally said, if you don't delete your footage, we're going to throw your camera over the bridge into the water. And I'm there on the bridge by myself. So I complied. And then I quietly kind of walked off the bridge, and I actually snuck down under the bridge off to the side, and I filmed the entire thing from there. And I watched as the National Guard, and what we would later learn was private security service named Tiger Swan, they brought in these armored vehicles and they parked them right there on the edge of the bridge, and then every single one of them drove off and left. And within moments, as soon as they left, these provocateurs start jumping on the vehicles, throwing in Molotov cocktails, lighting the vehicles on fire and cheering. And then of course, by the morning, the car's all burnt out. It's a pretty stark image. And then the next morning, all the media is reporting Standing Rock protesters, burning vehicles, this and that. It was, and then a year later, we had this confirmed where a whistleblower who actually worked for Tiger Swan specifically said on the day that I filmed this, that there were people who were told to light vehicles on fire and that they were infiltrators. So my point is, like, these things do happen. And then you get right-wing media who like to amplify that, either because they really truly believe it or because they know that it sells clicks, it's engagement farming, it's rage bait, people are going to freak out. And so people get pulled into that, and they're like, well, this is why we need the Marines on the street. This is why we need somebody like Trump. And yeah, it's sad to see this all happening. And I don't think it's the last time we're going to see it. I was just talking with another old friend who, and it's like, wow, I feel like I feel like our allies are not many out there who really truly understand what's going on.
Man. Yeah. And when you were sharing that, I don't know if you brought that up because of this, but these cars here that were just stopped at the bottom of a bridge, pelted with rocks and all sorts of craziness. It's like, why would you park right there? You could have just pulled under the bridge, like another 100 feet. But yeah, it's all by design. And yeah, I think one thing that we always try to prime is the importance of having principles. Because when you have principles and values, that's what guides you. But when you're not rooted in a principled foundation, which we both came into this from various different ways, but the whole Ron Paul revolution really got a lot of people to really understand the philosophy of liberty. And it doesn't have to be like a brand of libertarianism, but it's like self-ownership, voluntary interaction amongst one another, free markets and free exchange. And so it's like, that's what's most important. Non-aggression principle that transcends the identity politics, immigration, and this policy or that policy. And that's the world that we're trying to build. So that's the next step, is like, these are the principles. How can we build a world and build systems that honor and allow us to embody those principles without having to always be looking over our shoulder and stuff? That's what we're trying to do with this whole exit and build and freedom cell thing. And this is something that you're always saying when we're doing the greater reset, now the people's reset. It's like, we got to make sure we're talking about voluntarism, right? So for folks that are watching, we got a ton of people watching. What would you say are those important principles that people should consider adopting, and then using that as a filter to determine what do I think about this? What do I feel about this policy or that policy? Because like you pointed out, and I know that I don't know if you're deliberately being provocative, but it's like if somebody crosses an imaginary line, especially if they're fleeing a really shitty situation, oftentimes created by the Central Intelligence Agency and U.S. interests or big corporate mega nonsense. And they're just trying to create a better life for themselves. And they're hardworking and they raise a family and they're living the quote unquote American dream. So you shouldn't have the right to use violence, coercion against them. And that's when you're founded on principles. So what are these principles that are important? Maybe you could just highlight some of them.
Yeah, so a few things there. First of all, you're 100% right. I mean, I think that probably one of the biggest problems we have with this cycle that we were both just describing, the pendulum swinging, not just the pendulum of politics, but the people following it and going back and forth, is the lack of principle. I can just feel like you can trace so many things back to that because, for one, people don't have a sense of self. Who am I? You know, what is my place in the world? Where am I headed? What are my goals? What are the principles that I hold? I mean, I talk about this in my book, people can pick up for free at my website, The Holistic Self-Assessment. You have to first understand yourself. And then from there, you can kind of go further and, okay, well, now that I have a sense of who I am and what I'm after and what I believe in, what are the principles that I hold, dear to me? And most people consider themselves to be moral or ethical people, even if they haven't stopped to really kind of write those down. What are my actual principles? What are my actual morals? What do I believe in? But when we start with the foundational principle, that's sometimes known as the non-aggression principle, the golden rule, like you said, self-ownership, sovereignty of the individual, the idea that I am a free, powerful person in my own right. I have the right to decide my own affairs and my own life, and that nobody out there hearing this has any right to use force, fraud, or coercion on me to make me live the way they want. And definitely that applies to government as well. I think most people do hold that true. At least they believe they do. And then, as we've learned over the years, once you bring government into the equation, there's like a disconnect. Like somebody might be like, well, I'm not going to force you, John, to do this or do that, or to not live this way, or to not do this habit or this behavior that I don't like that you do. But I'm going to go vote for the government and try to get the government to ban it. And if you do it again, then they're going to lock you up, right? They don't see this connection between, even if you're not the one committing the violence, you're the one supporting, voting for it, et cetera. So I also think that, what comes to mind as you're sharing that is that I can say this, that I don't think the majority of my audience is voluntarists. I've focused on voluntarism and anarchism over the years. I think a lot less than I did in the 2014, 15, 16, 17, when I was writing my Conscious Resistance trilogy, when I was super nerding out on anarchism and had some sort of naive hope or belief that maybe we could convince everybody to recognize that government's immoral and that we could build this movement big enough to, I don't know, but I don't have those same hopes anymore. It doesn't mean that I've given up on the beliefs. I still live them, breathe them, and talk to people about them whenever they're, appropriate, whenever it's that time. But I say that because I realize that as this conversation comes up around immigration, like you said, I made a post saying, I use the word imaginary line. I don't think I'm the first person to do so. And I mean that because I don't think the state has the right to decide borders, and without us derailing into a whole conversation about the philosophy of borders and immigration and whether or not the government should be in charge of that, I recognize that the majority of people who follow me, whether they follow on Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, et cetera, they do believe in borders. They do believe in government. Some of them, they like my reporting. They like some of the freedom message. I think there's the crowd that gets it. They get it all. And they're like, hardcore volunteers, agorists. They're with me on every step of that. But for example, like I've been posting about the Agorist Cipher newsletter that both you and I are part of. And I can see that gets 1/10 or less of the reaction and response that my posts about politics do, right? It's just like, not only are some people just not interested in solutions, but I do think that the vast minority of my audience are actually truly getting the message that I'm trying to put out there. And I keep trying and I keep pushing it out there, but I think that's an important point. So when I say things like that, I get, negative reactions from some of my own followers, and that's fine. They don't have to believe everything I believe and hang on every word I say. But in my mind, I'm just like, you guys still don't get it. You still believe in government. You still think that the state's the solution. So I find that to be problematic. And I think that goes back to principles, that people lack principle. For example, I just posted a couple moments ago that in my mind, the resistance against the COVID lockdowns and mandates, and in some cases taking people away to quarantine centers or quarantine camps or locking them in their homes or taking people from their kids, all the crazy things that we witnessed during COVID-19 '84 in the name of lockdowns and vaccines. There were examples when people were organizing and they were trying to stop police from taking people, and they were trying to, block streets and do things like that. In my mind, even though the cause is different, when I see people organizing against ICE and trying to prevent people from their communities being taken away or trying to block streets to stop this, I see the same principle underneath it. But I understand that some people can't make that connection. They're like, no, that's crazy, Derrick. Illegals are illegals. That's not the same thing as resisting vaccines. These people are illegal. They broke the law. So we should support the federal government taking them away. In my mind, again, outside of the fact that there are criminals, and if those criminals are held, responsible for their actions, great. But I'm just talking about the New York Times story I read the other day about Carol, this Chinese woman who's been in the country for 30 years, who lives in small rural Missouri town, and who was recently taken away by ICE. And when the people there who all voted for Trump are like, oh my God, I didn't realize this was going to happen. I thought he was going to go after criminals, not Carol, not our local waitress. Like, oh my God, now it's really real. To me, it's just, if you have that principle that we all own ourselves, that government is immoral, just to name a couple, then, and you kind of look at everything with that lens, then it's easy to sort of know how to approach these situations. Doesn't mean you have to embrace everything that's happening in LA. Doesn't mean you have to endorse people burning vehicles or damaging private property, because again, there's provocateurs, those are real. But at the very least, you can see that, hey, I understand these is people resisting government. And if I resist it on one hand, I don't necessarily have to endorse their entire cause to say I can sympathize with why they're resisting government over here. And at least that's kind of how I try to apply with my principles. And, so start out with self-ownership. Everybody owns themselves. And not only do you have to extend that to other people and give them that same right. And if you approach the world with that foundational principle, I do think it changes the way you view things, and you can kind of come back to it instead of just being flip-floppy and letting the trending, triggering topic of the week, the drama of the week, sway you this way and in that way and in that way. And then if you stop and look at your actions, when you do this self-assessment, you actually realize, oh, wow, I'm not in alignment in any areas. I claim to believe this, but then actually I'm being, swayed this way and swayed this way. And I'm kind of all over the place. But if you're rooted in your principles and values, it doesn't really matter what drama happens this week on the news or on social media or in your personal life. It doesn't mean it won't impact you or affect you, but you can at least kind of center yourself on that and stay consistent. And I think that consistency triggers a lot of people. I notice, like, when you're consistent with something, they just can't handle it. They want you to buy into the latest outrage or the whatever the thing is you're supposed to give up your principles for this week. People want you to buy into that. And when you stay consistent, it's a lonely territory, I think. I don't think there's a lot of people, and I'm not sitting here tooting my own horn. I'm just saying in general, living by your principles, I think it can be a lonely place.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And here's your controversial tweet. I support people resisting ICE and the federal government goons if they're attempting to take people whose only crime is crossing the border illegally. They're nonviolent, contributing to their community and not harming anyone, then the feds are the aggressors. And I'm with you. As soon as I saw you post that, I was like, oh, this is going to cause a shitstorm. But a lot of this,
and knowing that it's
I know you do. I think you enjoy it. I think a lot of the point of this psyop is to get people to be against one another and to focus their energy on the other, when in all reality, there's a technocratic control grid being built all around us. In this pendulum, I wanted to do some kind of visualization where the predator class has an agenda and it's always marching forward. And they're so cunning that they're able to even leverage very powerful people like Donald Trump, right? You may think he's a total control thing. I think there's some independence, but then he just got leveraged and like they're playing to his ego or what the hell ever, his big business sense. And they're just like, all right, we can play this guy. And so it's like, the agenda towards the Great Reset, total panopticon, digital surveillance society is always advancing. And then so imagine advancing here, but the pendulum swinging. And the harder the pendulum swings in this reactionary way, where people are now justifying the technology being implemented, the Patriot Act, John Warner Defense Authorization Act, back in the day after 9/11. And now we got all this modern big tech AI surveillance with Palantir stuff. The more it swings and the more reactionary people get, the faster this goes forward. And so it doesn't matter if it's left or right in control, whatever president, this agenda is always advancing. So What are your thoughts on that? And I do want to invite folks. We got a 13th International Freedom Cell Activation call coming up. Derrick and I will be hosting this. It's June 25th, 12 p.m., free to join. It'll be a couple hours. We'll share some updates. Derrick wants to share about organizing. We're going to be opening the floor to hear from folks that are having victories or struggles within the network. But if you haven't heard of this, it's a network of over 40,000 people, solutions focused, principled, or at least we're trying to get people to be more and more principled. And you guys can join. I'll share this link in the comments. But what do you think about that?
Yeah.
No matter what's happening over here with the pendulum, the agenda is just plowing forward. And more importantly, what can we do about that?
Yeah, I want to just encourage everybody to definitely join us for the 13th International Freedom Cells activation there. We've been doing those for years. It's been a little while. We get busy and things. And as I said, the Freedom Cell Network tends to ebb and flow as the state of the world, whether it's chaotic or peaceful. But I do encourage people to join us. Looking forward to that, because I still think that's the answer right now, is that we need to be organizing on a local level in a decentralized manner. We need to not just be thinking Donald Trump or any politician is going to come save us, or from the folks maybe on the other side thinking that whoever they're lining up, Gavin Newsom on the other side, is going to be the hero in a couple of years. Whatever it is, there's always going to be fake political solutions. There's always going to be people trying to pull you towards violence, to pull you towards apathy and being, doomer, black-pilled, things like that. And I don't think that's really going to help anybody. It's definitely not going to help us, and it's definitely not going to help the coming generations, which I think really is what we're fighting for in the world that we're leaving them. So I encourage people to learn more about freedom cells. And as far as that pendulum, yeah, I mean, to me, I think once you step out of it, it's pretty obvious. I also realize, man, it's such a headache trying to talk to people on the internet, because, and I want to get better. I'm like, calling this out. I want to get better at blocking and just ignoring people as soon as I recognize this is not going anywhere, because I do genuinely enjoy engaging with people when I feel like we can have a healthy discussion, as people have witnessed with me talking with Ian Carroll for 2 hours and totally disagreeing.
Yeah, that's bore a lot of fruit for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And people, and I'm realizing that people enjoy that. That's not something that people are used to these days. What they are used to is what the trap that I'm guilty of falling in with other people, which is like, you're an idiot, back and forth. And that's kind of how people expect dialogue to be these days. And I hate it. I really hate that. Like, when I ask someone a genuine question on the internet, they're kind of already in fight mode and they're ready to yell at me and say something like, yo, hold on. I was just genuinely curious about this question I asked you. I wasn't trying to set you up for a gotcha or something like that. And vice versa. People ask me something and I might kind of come off at them a little quick because I'm getting attacked on social media and I have to pull myself back. But okay, take a breath. I hate this though, because I think this is part of the psychological operation, this 5th generation warfare, weaponizing social media. I think we need to recognize that so many of the tools that we know can and do sometimes play a role in benefiting us, in this case, social media, the internet, stuff like that, it has been weaponized to a degree that most people cannot imagine. Not only the algorithms showing you certain things they want you to see, the trending topics you can't trust because they might tell you something's trending, because we know that Facebook and social media have run tests to see how it affects our moods. It can make us angry. It can make us happy, jealous, insecure, all this stuff. It's a real thing. That is a real battlefield out there. And we don't think about that when we pull up our social media accounts and start scrolling, but it is a battlefield out there that is intended to manipulate our emotions, to have us arguing about something, this and that. And we have to find ways, I think, to rise above that. In fact, I don't use Instagram often. And the reason that I love it better than any of the other ones is because I don't use it often. When I go there, the little feed, if I check it, it's just animals, because I look up animals. It's like, okay, this is the most peaceful place for me on the internet, is just like the social media I don't use at all. When I get on the other social media feed,
and regen agriculture.
See, that's all. I feel like there's a place for all of it, right? You were talking earlier about how, I do spend time trying to reach people. And part of it is because I've taken on the role of being an independent journalist and a writer, and I love it. This is my passion. But I do try to temper that with educate and then pull towards exit and build, educate and then pull towards exit and build, pull people towards my presentations. I think that the presentations I've given over the last decade are vastly more useful and impactful and motivational and inspirational than the vast majority of my articles. I think I've done some great journalism and exposed some different stories, and I will continue to do that. But again, I'm always trying to hook people in, especially those who are just in the sort of becoming awake and looking for answers. stage of things, get them into the pyramid of power, get them into the articles, and then pull them in and teach them about freedom cells, teach them about exit and build, encourage them to watch my presentations, which are all free at theconsciousresistance.com. And I've been speaking publicly for 12, 13 years now. And everything that I share as far as solutions is in those talks. And so I do see the balance of trying to pull people in that. And sometimes I think I'll go too heavy on one side and I'll put too much of my energy into the, online battling and the sort of battlefield of ideas, and then try to pull back and like, all right, I just need to lead by example. I just need to pull, into that. And that is what I'm doing as well. I do want to make that clear. I mean, we paid off our land for the Conscious Agora in January. We are just like, well, I'm in Texas right now, but right now our caretaker's there and we're starting our food forest. As of like today, he's taken out some pines. We're starting to transplant some of our agave. We're getting ready to put some mango trees in Mame. We're working on our spring, our ponds, and like, hopefully if everything goes well in January, after the People's Reset, we'll be having our first little mini retreat and bringing people to the land. We're going to start building our community center. Like, I'm actively working on these things, even if I'm not talking about them so much on social media. And I want to do more of that. I want to do more of the documentation process as we do it, to show people like, hey, it's not just about being obsessed with the news. What are you actually building? That's ultimately the message. And of course, that's why the People's Reset's still so important to me. That's why what you do with Exit and Build is so Land Summit so important. And I wish more of our audience out there, and I'm speaking to all of you guys out there on both sides of on my channels and John's channels, get out from behind the computer, come to an in-person event. Even if you don't come to Mexico, you don't go to John's event, go to your local meetup, start a local meetup. The internet is a valuable tool, but it's not the real world. There's a world out there in the physical meat space with other humans, and that's where we can get organized. They can't stop us yet at the moment from organizing in person. And even when they tried during COVID, they didn't. People still organized. People used the website and found a way to connect. So I think that's just where we should be putting our attention is, put away the distractions and the stuff. Even put away me. Don't read my articles or watch my videos or John's for a couple of days, and go out and see if you can find people in your local area. And if there's nobody, start a group, start a cell, start putting up flyers in coffee shops and in the local meetup spaces, and see if you can find even a couple other people who are like-minded and get together in person, start having these conversations, start talking about the solutions that matter to you. You will find value in your life. And I don't know if I've mentioned it before on your show since I put it up, but I did create a free 45-day exit and build challenge that people can find at theconsciousresistance.com/EXB. And it's just seven weeks. If you do it, the way I kind of outlined it, you do one challenge a week and you follow the homework and start implementing these ideas in your life. And I did that in the lead up to the 2024 election to try to see if I could sway anybody from voting towards something more valuable. But it looks at money, food, land, education, all sorts of different areas, and it applies this exit and build idea. And so just want to invite anybody, if you're new to this and you actually want to see, I believe if you actually take the challenge seriously, by the end of that 7 weeks, you will see some value. You will see some changes in your life if you do implement the steps in there.